So firstly, Merry Christmas. Although technically we're in November, but you know, whatever. And secondly, like most people this year, COVID has really balls things up for me. I mean, I had it all planned out and everything, but I'll show you what I'm talking about.
She was the largest ship ever built, sending shockwaves around the globe. Her maiden voyage would be her last. Why did she steam at full speed into an ice field? And why did a supposedly unsinkable ship sink so suddenly?
The 14th of April 1912 is an extraordinary moment in time.
Scientists of a joint U.S.-French expedition said today they have found wreckage of the ocean liner whose name is a legend, the SS Titanic.
Now, anyone who knows me well, or knows me in the slightest actually, will know that I have a particular interest, fascination, obsession, whatever you want to call it, with a particular event in history. And if you've not got it by now, then well, there really is no hope for you. I mean, I'd advise against leaving the house completely if you've not caught on to what I'm talking about. Basically, back in January, I was going to launch my very own Titanic-themed YouTube channel. And I know what you're thinking, oh my god, not another channel based on this beauty here. Because yes, in truth, there are literally hundreds of channels dedicated to the Titanic with thousands of videos. But my channel was going to be slightly different. I mean, it was going to be good, for starters. Oh god, I can't say that. That sounds so pretentious. Let's do that again. Boop, boop. 9 times out of 10, when you see or read something about the Titanic today, it concentrates mostly on her sinking. It's like at the moment of 2:20 AM on the morning of April 15th, 1912, the moment she slipped beneath the waves, that's it. Her story's over. Finished. There's nothing more to tell. But just like other events in history, the aftermath and the events leading up to said event, whatever it may be, are just as important and significant as the actual event itself. We all know the familiar stories of the Titanic, the band that played on till the ship sank, Captain Smith, who went down with his ship, not enough lifeboats. We've heard these stories time and time again. But what we don't hear, or what we very rarely hear about, is what happened after the disaster to the Titanic. What happened to the survivors? What happened to the relatives of the people who had died? Some survivors went on to achieve great things after the disaster. For example, one survivor went on to win Wimbledon, the tennis championship. And on the flip side of that, you've got survivors whose lives were absolutely destroyed by the Titanic. But you very, very rarely hear of any of these stories. And it was these stories that I was going to look to explore in my videos. And I was going to do this by visiting certain locations around the country, around the world. But of course, thanks to COVID, that put a complete stopper on it. So I decided that I still wanted to launch this channel, but I wanted to launch it in a specific way. And I've come into possession of a particular item which is going to help, well, hopefully is going to help kickstart this Titanic aftermath journey. And we're actually going to go and look at this item now. So I've decided to come upstairs and do this next part. No particular reason, I just couldn't be bothered to sit downstairs, and I can now look at myself directly in my wardrobe mirror, which is slightly unsettling, but there we go. So I thought to myself, what better way to start this Titanic aftermath journey and hopefully lead on to other videos in the future, hopefully in the new year, than to look at the direct aftermath of the disaster and how it was reported in the media, in the newspapers. And I'm going to do that by showing you this lovely item that is just off camera that I just cannot wait to show you, which I'm so excited about having in my collection. So this is a copy of the Daily Mirror dated Tuesday, April 16th, 1912, detailing the initial reports of the Titanic disaster. And when I say that this is a copy, it is actually that. It is a reprint, a reproduction of the original, printed around the 1970s, the 1980s. I'm not exactly sure when. It came into my collection. Do you know what? I can't even remember when it came into my collection. I've had it a very, very long time. So probably around when I was a teenager, and I'm not going to mention how long ago that was. The originals, of course, are very, very rare, hard to come by, and will set you back quite a bit of money. The reprints, on the other hand, will cost you about £2 or £3 maybe a fiver on a good day. When the originals do come up for auction, they can fetch quite a hefty price. Of course, not as hefty as, say, like Wallace Hartley's violin, which sold for £1.1 million at a recent auction. As far as Titanic items go, original newspapers are relatively cheap. Wouldn't that be cool if I had Wallace Hartley's violin? I did bid on it, but I got outbidded. It went over my £25 price limit. How would I store that? Logistical nightmare. Anyway, I know what you're thinking. Wouldn't it be cool if I was doing this Titanic aftermath journey, looking at newspapers, if I had an original copy of a newspaper? Well, guess what? So this is it. This is the item that I purchased from auction, which only arrived a few days ago. As you can see, it is a copy of the Daily Mirror I showed you a few moments ago. However, unlike the previous copy, this is an original. It is 100% authentic and genuine. This paper here is complete and was first published on April 16th, 1912, making this item nearly 110 years old and the oldest item in my Titanic collection. It details the first initial UK reports that some form of disaster had occurred to the Titanic. However, it's highly inaccurate in its reporting. Journalism in 1912 suffered very much the same form of problems that modern day journalists encounter, in that initial reports can often be blurred with misinformation and confusion, and of course can lead to misreporting. We can see this clearly here in this edition of the Daily Mirror. Although it reports, and I quote, a disaster occurring to the Titanic, that's as far as it goes. In fact, when we take a look inside, it goes the complete opposite way and states that the Titanic was safe, damaged but being towed back to port, and all of her passengers being transferred to other vessels to continue their journey on to New York. The reason this was reported was down to a number of different factors. News did travel relatively fast at the time, although of course not as fast as today, where we have the likes of social media and instant news reporting. Even so, the news that Titanic had actually sank had begun to spread amongst journalists, even at time of publication of this newspaper. However, news was so sketchy, many tabloids didn't want to risk going as far as to publicly announce loss of life through fear of being wrong. Many reporters knew early on that the Titanic breaking news story was likely to be headline news around the world. They not only wanted to be the first to report it, but they also wanted to be accurate. By the time the New York Times had published its newspaper for the same day on April 16th, things had become slightly more clear. Americans, of course, benefited from the time difference of around 6 hours, and by the time their paper went to print, they had established with a reasonable amount of certainty that the ship had actually sank, taking a significant amount of lives with her, as can be seen here on their front page, detailing a more accurate account of the sinking. The first official confirmation received regarding Titanic's fate was sent in the form of a telegram from Mr. J. Bruce Ismay, chairman of the White Star Line, who was aboard the rescue ship, the Carpathia. It was sent 11 hours after the Titanic had actually gone down and received at the company's New York head office at around 1 p.m, around 7 p.m. UK time. Of course, by then, this paper here had already gone to print. It took nearly a whole day for newspapers to begin reporting more accurate information, confirming the disaster to the awaiting UK public. So you're probably wondering now, how do I know that it's 100% genuine? Well, I purchased it via a specialist auction house that deals in Titanic artefacts and memorabilia. So before it would have even been offered for sale, it would have been looked at and it would have been assessed to make sure that it is 100% genuine. So on that basis, I'm 99% sure that what I've got here is the real deal. So now we get onto the topic of what it's worth, and after auction fees and logistics, I paid just shy of £200 for this. Some might say that's pretty steep, but if you think about it, like I mentioned earlier, when Wallace Hartley's violin sold for 1.1 million, it pretty much is loose change. And also, it's not the most expensive item in my Titanic collection. That title goes to my Titanic model downstairs in my living room. I paid for that what some people might pay for their first second-hand car. Now, that is wincing when I think about it, how much I actually paid for that. But it's worth it, I love it. So it's highly, highly unlikely that I will ever sell this item on. So by the time that this item comes up for sale next, it's probably going to be in excess of its 150th birthday. The thing I love most about this item is not necessarily its association to the Titanic, but its tangible link to the past. Over 100 years ago, someone went out and bought this paper on the morning of the 16th and had no way of knowing that in over 100 years, some geek would be sitting in his living room doing a YouTube video about it. So that's pretty much it for this video. I was mindful I didn't want to go on for too long because I was worried I might bore people. So if you've actually got to this part, well done. Like I said, this wasn't actually intended to be my first video in this series. I had planned to go out and do an episode on a particular character associated with the Titanic, but that will be in episode 2. Just as soon as COVID restrictions are lifted, I shall be out there and I shall be filming more episodes. So if you have enjoyed this video, then great. Give me a like, give me a subscribe, that'd be great. The more subscribers I get, the more likely I'm going to do more videos. If I have like 1 subscriber, which will probably end up just being my mum, you know, I probably won't do any more. Just one final thought, really, before I say goodbye, that it occurred to me that whilst I was filming this video, I was looking back at a very specific moment in time, unprecedented for the time. Something like the sinking of the Titanic was totally unthinkable. And it made me think that I'm pretty much living in a very similar time as how they did back then. COVID 2020 is a worldwide pandemic that no one in living memory has ever experienced. And it made me wonder that if in 100 years' time, will someone or will people, well of course they will be looking back at this particular moment in history, just how I'm looking back at the Titanic. What will it be like in 100 years' time? Will there be such thing as the internet, or will have technology and life evolve to something far greater than the internet? Will people be looking back at these videos and the millions of other YouTube videos in a way, you know, like we look back at old newsreels and old newspapers? It just makes you wonder, really. And I shall leave you with that thought, and I shall say goodbye. So until the next video, goodbye, my friends.